Anybody else? Okay, got it. Cool.
So I was at NO last week. I feel a little bit better about it this week. There's a lot, staff did a good job. These amendments address most of the notes that I have from the public testimony and the concerns that were brought up by people last 2 weeks ago. A lot of those were addressed by what you brought us today, which is good. I wish I had more time to digest them. I think that there's a couple of things that I need to change to be a pro on this. I don't know if those will pass tonight. And then additionally, the big thing for me was the reductions in the canopy. So, you know, our goal was 30%, but we get down to 10%, which is ridiculous. So getting rid of those and having it reinforced by a public process, I think is great. That is where this needed to head. Getting rid of the discretion and the credits were too low. So those two things I really like. There's a lot of things I don't like and I'm kind of wishy-washy on right now. The penalties thing, not having penalties for taking them down is a problem for me. You know, I know that right now there's nothing in the code that does this, but allowing somebody to plant 6-foot trees and then the homeowner buy it and then cut those down doesn't really do a lot for tree canopy, so I don't love that. And then the requirement, I know there's a little bit of a credit. I'd like to see more incentive for keeping the significant trees. So I don't really know at this stage what I'm going to do, but at the very least, as Gordon said on a minority report, I think that this is headed in the right direction, but there needs to be a lot more work done that you mentioned with the stakeholder groups, which it sounds like it's going to happen. So.
Anybody else? No?
Well, I guess if nobody else is going to jump in, I would like to have been last too, but I think I like the idea of trying to come up with an ordinance to maintain or create viable tree canopy that has survivability and quality, not just planting a bunch of shrubs and trees. And I know the existing ordinance doesn't cover that. You're just not going to get a quality canopy out of it. And in the notes that I sent out to everybody, my comments, I think I was trying to make a point that the quality of a canopy is not just two-dimensional. It's three-dimensional. It's volume. It has to do with the types of trees and how much environmental impact they're going to have. But to really look at it in a qualitative manner, I think is way beyond what an ordinance can really deal with. It ends up being something that's just way too complex and there is no mechanism that I've ever seen that really gets you there. The other issue I have is, I see that you're trying to get here in requiring calculations of existing and new canopies shall be submitted in writing by a certified arborist. Well, certainly having somebody who has specific knowledge of trees and tree canopies, I think that's a good thing. But for practical purposes, I think you're now adding in another layer of cost to the general public that I don't really know is entirely necessary. I think there's conditions on many of my own projects. There are times I've had to hire an arborist for project submittals and dealing with specific trees, but to have to hire an arborist for every condition, I think is excessive and probably going to become a burden to the general public. You can't, I think I don't think it is practical to assume that cost is just going to be absorbed by a developer. it's going to end up going to the end user, which is the general public. And I don't think that's the way this, dealing with canopy, tree canopy, and trying to measure canopy is still going in the wrong direction. It's just making it way too complicated. Tree canopies are not symmetrical. They may not even be a circle. I mean, you got pi r squared here, assuming that all trees grow symmetrically, and that's just, that's not reality either. And who's going to, I mean, you're gonna hire an arborist to go out there and actually measure the drip line of every tree on the property? I think that's nuts. I think if you're gonna have an arborist get involved and I mean, you're thinking about having them do the calculations or come up with recommendations for a specific site, I think the county should probably consider asking the Association of Certified Arborists. There's a number of associations that could be utilized, and get input on creating a matrix of what reasonable canopy values are for specific trees. The county should go ahead and make a, if you're going to keep going in this direction, the county could make a matrix saying this species of tree has this value of canopy, and this is the spacing that species should be planted at. So even if you've got a mix of trees, that you can somehow, you can organize the trees so, okay, I've got an ornamental that only has a canopy of 20 feet, and I've got a western red cedar or a spruce tree, and it's going to have a canopy diameter of 25 or 30 feet, or and you can start working these together, but it's still probably more complicated than it really needs to be. So I think the ordinance, the current ordinance, I think clearly doesn't work. It has a lot of problems. I think everybody agrees with that. I like the idea of trying to create and encourage development of tree canopies and maintaining tree canopies. But trying to do all these measurements by tree canopies, I think just doesn't work. It just isn't practical. And having to hire an arborist every time you do a project to write a letter on every project, every time you plant a tree, I think that's excessive too. So I guess I have a hard time going, I couldn't approve this either. I think it needs a lot of work. I think it needs to have some more forethought in it that doesn't require a subjective report written for every project. I think that's just not in the public's best interest. I think the county could do something more to create a matrix that makes it more user-friendly for development, for designing, for deciding what is existing and what can be maintained, what's practical. And this just doesn't go that direction.
Okay, good. So
I'll go.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you go first. You want to go? That's great. So I just have my notes from last time, which pertain to the proposal that was made last time, not to the new amendments. So I'll just talk off those real quickly. I'm obviously concerned with this proposal. Particularly, I don't think that a canopy approach is absolutely impossible to be successful. I just think that, because I think our fourth meeting on this issue, and every time we've had different abstractions of this, sometimes very different abstractions of it, and all of them have seemed so incredibly complicated. It's kind of what I said, I think a meeting or two ago, where I said it's like the tax code to me. You know, the current rules are more like a flat tax. This is the way it works. There's a very specific rule, and it's pretty clear. This seems like jump through them all. And I'm concerned by the complexity of these regulations. I'm concerned that the current proposal allows all trees of significance to be 100% cut. It eliminates all existing pre-clear cutting regulations and enforcement, as well as fines that go along with that in the code right now. It sets 20-year goals. You can cut something flat and say, well, in 20 years we'll have, 10 or 15% of this, given the exemptions, be trees. Well, it's a pretty far out abstract goal. In the meantime, we have a flat piece of property. There's no guarantee that it'll actually reach that coverage. There's, no guarantee it will be cut right after. Of course, we don't have that guarantee anyway. But basically, there's no prohibition against anyone cutting any tree, anytime, anywhere in this proposal as I read it. When people replant, half of it can be bushes. Of the things that aren't bushes, half of the remaining trees, half of those trees can be evergreens. Have to be evergreens, the rest can be anything else. There's further reductions that can be applied on top of that. And again, it's all, these are after 20 years. There's the provision about the director's discretion for further reductions that concerns me. I'm a little bit concerned that because the current code tries to encourage matching current native species with current native species, and this new proposal seems not to do that. How our neighborhoods are and what our ecosystem is might be, made up of whatever bush is the cheapest, that month at Home Depot or whatever, tree is the best market price rather than what the native species of our state and our county are. Like I said, bushes aren't trees, rain gardens aren't trees, open space, it appears in some cases in the original proposal appears to be counted as trees. The proposed amendment would clarify so that's not the case. It just seems like almost anything can be counted as trees. A tree that's 51% on your property but located on somebody else's property can be counted as all of your trees. So if I'm next to a park and there's a tree hanging over the fence, that's my tree. That counts for my property. Almost anything seems like it can count on a tree. And there's just so many loopholes and so many things that can be counted that I can imagine a property where there isn't a tree and yet easily meets the goal. I think I had some concern in the various briefings about how much tree coverage that we were going to obtain, that we've been conflating public and private lands. That was something I asked for clarification on several times, and I still think the percentages that we're seeing include a lot of public spaces, so that when we're setting these goals, it's been asked a lot of times, how can we allow a reduction down to 15% or 10% and still think that we're going to meet some 30% goal? I think it's because the figures are being conflated with public spaces. That's my own understanding of how that can be achieved. And or we're counting things that are trees. I wonder if the current rules, some members have said, well, we're all in agreement that the current rules aren't working. I don't have an on-the-ground experience on that, but I don't know that they're not working. They seem pretty simple to me. If I cut down a small tree, I have to plant a small replacement tree. If I cut down a medium-sized tree, I have to plant 2 saplings. If I cut down a really big tree, I have to plant 3 saplings. The concern I've heard voiced is, well, I might be overplanting the border of my property, then some of those trees might not survive. No, that's fine. That's the way things are. And there's no guarantee that any of the trees planted under these 20-year targets will survive either. And it can be good to have undergrowth, under trees that are underdeveloped or that fall over and form woody debris. These can all be good things. And if they're things that the person who moves into that house doesn't desire, they can take action as a landowner and take care of that issue on their own. But what they can't do is they can't go in the past and plant those trees so that they'll be there. If you get a piece of property that just has some bushes in a rain garden, it's going to be a couple of generations of investment before you'll ever have any chance of having trees on that property. So that while as you as a property owner can always go the other way, you can't retroactively plant trees. So I think there should be as much of an affirmative obligation as we can to provide landowners the option to have trees on their property.